Okay, so our next class is case study 2. Similar to what we did for the first case study, I have uploaded the case study material and the case questions on week 12's material. So take a look at it, read through before we discuss the case. And then for distance learning students, let me know by this Friday which participation option you're choosing for this case study. We also have a new assignment which will be available tomorrow. And since you have a case study to prepare for this week, I'm going to make the deadline to 2 weeks from now. All right. And then for case study, don't forget to bring your laptop, any device that you can type your solutions or your answers in, and also your name card. Okay, any questions? Okay, if not, let's move on to talk about inventory management. So in last class, we discussed the management of inventory system, particularly pertaining to cycle inventory. Right, so we saw that the reason why we hold cycle inventory is mainly to utilize the economy of scale. Right? And in a lot of cases, we either have quantity discount or we have a fixed ordering cost each time an order is placed. And as a result, we need to hold cycle inventory to reduce these fixed costs and utilize economy of scale. So in the next chapter, we're going to look at another type of inventory, which is safety inventory. So we're going to see why do we use safety inventory in supply chains, and determine what are the factors that determines our decision of how much safety inventory to carry. And then based on these factors, determine the appropriate level of safety inventory. And then understanding the benefit of aggregation. And then finally talk about some managerial levers for lowering safety inventory levels without hurting product availability. Okay, so first let's define safety inventory. So safety inventory is the amount of inventory we hold to be safe. So in which case are we not safe? It's when the demand exceeds what we have forecasted. Right? So in order to prevent that case from affecting our bottom line, we hold safety inventory. So the advantage of holding safety inventory is, of course, to enable us to better meet supply with demand, even if our forecast is not completely correct. So by holding some amount of safety inventory, the more we hold, the higher our ability to make product available when customer demand comes in. But of course, there's the downside, which is inventory holding cost. Right? No matter what type of inventory it is, if we increase inventory, we also increase the associated cost. So to put the two types of inventory together, imagine that, so for this system, from this dashed line above is what we seen last class, which is cycle inventory, right? So we place an order of size Q each time, and then on average, this inventory is going to be consumed at a certain demand rate. And then last time we place an would place an order, and then which brings up the inventory up, and this cycle goes on and on again. And so then we have safety inventory, which is the extra amount of inventory that we hold in case our forecast is incorrect and there's more demand than we had forecasted. So this portion is the bottom portion is our safety inventory. And of course, so this graph illustrates the expected case. So of course, in reality, demand is never a fixed number. So you would not see inventory dropping down in a straight line fashion. And it will be probably more like, something like this, depending on, what the demand realization is. Sometimes you need to use safety inventory, and sometimes, and sometimes you don't need to use safety inventory. So in discussing safety inventory, the role of safety inventory, the effect of safety inventory, we want to address 3 important questions. One is, since safety inventory is enabling us to better meets demand with supply, so making our product more available. So then a high-level question is, how available should our product be? And now, given that we have this determined the desired level of product availability, then how much safety inventory should we hold in order to ensure availability? And then finally, what kind of additional actions can we take to help us reduce safety inventory further without hurting product availability? So in this chapter, we're going to focus on illustrating the second and the third question. And in chapter 3, we're going to focus on the first question. Chapter 13, I mean. Okay, so to determine the appropriate level of safety inventory, we need to understand what are the main factors that affect how much safety inventory we should hold. Now, first factor is, what is the desired level of product availability? So in our context, when we're determining the optimal level of safety inventory, we consider that desired level of product availability is already determined. So this is generally a strategic level decision of the company. So now, obviously, the more available we are making the products, the more inventory we need to hold. And also, the safety inventory also depends on the level of uncertainty associated with demand, right? So imagine if the demand uncertainty is very high, then that means we need to hold more or less safety inventory. More. Generally more, right? Unless in some very extreme cases where we don't really care about service level, then we can actually get away from holding less inventory. But in the vast majority of cases, more demand uncertainty means more safety inventory. And then it also is determined by the uncertainty of supply. Right, so the role of safety inventory is to serve as the intermediator between how we match supply with demand. So the uncertainty from either side is going to affect our ability to do so. And so similarly as demand uncertainty, the higher the supply uncertainty, the more safety inventory we need. And then the level of safety inventory is also dependent on our inventory replenishment policy. So, for example, are we using continuous review inventory or periodic review inventory? Are we using a make to order up to level? Are we using a reorder point? And so on and so forth. So generally, inventory replenishment policy would be determined before we assign the appropriate level of safety inventory. Okay, so let's look at these different factors one by one. First is to understand product availability. So the product availability is generally measured as service level. And there are different metrics for service level. For example, one commonly used service level is the fill rate. So fill rate is the percentage or fraction of product demand that is satisfied from inventory. Now, so this means, say I have, in this week, there are total of 100 products demand received, and then I had 90 units of inventory. That means my fill rate is going to be 90%, right? Assuming that I only have one type of products, one type of inventory. So slightly different from product fill rate. So this is product fill rate defined as by each individual product. Slightly different is order fill rate. So say imagine if you're Apple, right? You're selling different types of products. Then I could have customers coming in wanting to buy both a laptop and an iPhone. So the order is considered to be satisfied from inventory if both products in the order are satisfied. So generally, order fill rate is lower than product fill rate. And then we have another type of service level, which is cycle service level. So cycle service level is defined in terms of replenishment cycles. So in our figure, right, if we place an order of certain size each time, and then in between different orders is our order cycle. And during each of these cycles, there is a possibility for me to run out of inventory, or there is a possibility for me to have leftover inventory. So let's say, I received I have a history of 4 order cycles, and in first period I have a demand of 100, and my starting inventory is 100, and in second period demand turns out to be 120 and inventory is still 100. Let's hold inventory to be 100, starting inventory to be 100 in all cycles. For 3, our demand is say 90, and then for 4, demand is 110. So cycle service level look at what percentage of these order cycles do I run out of inventory, or do I have sufficient inventory? So in the first period, are all the customer demand met? Yes. Second period? No. 3?
Yes.
Yes.
No.
4? No. So it turns out our CSL in this example is 50%. Okay. Now, of course, if you look at the other service level measures, this service level would be different. You know, for say for the product fill rates, the fill rates for period 1 is going to be 100%. This is 100 divided by 120. So 10/12, and then this is 90%, and this is, this is 100%, and this is 100/110. And you may take an average of these numbers, and you'll get a value that's much higher than 50% if you use fill rate as an indicator. So second factor is demand uncertainty. So measuring demand uncertainty, this is done through variability of demand. So, denoting that the demand follow a certain distribution. It's a random variable in this case. We know that's average, and we know its standard deviation. And so the standard deviation of demand is basically our forecast error. Right, so the longer we have to place, the longer before the selling season we have to place an order, generally means the higher the forecast error, and so the bigger the delta D. So in our example, so this demand can follow any distribution. Right? It can be discrete distribution, continuous distribution, and in any forms. And in most of our examples, we'll assume that demand follows a normal distribution. With average D and standard deviation delta or sigma D. And similarly, supply uncertainty. We have supply uncertainty can be measured as the certain uncertainty in the supply lead time. Right? Of course, you can go into the nitty-gritty of, say, sometimes the supplier doesn't deliver the asked amount, but usually that is a small part of supply uncertainty. So the main portion comes from lead time variability. Right, so the lead time may also be a random variable, which we may assume to follow also a normal distribution with average lead time L and standard deviation of lead time sigma L. So introducing lead time variability is actually going to complicate the computation significantly. So for the interest of this class, we're going to, for the mathematical portion at least, we're not going to introduce lead time uncertainty. So basically, on our examples, we're going to assume, that delta L is equal to 0. So lead time is a fixed number. Now, for replenishment policies, the types of replenishment policies can generally be divided under the review policies. One is continuous review, so which means that you have an electronic tracking system that allows you to continuously monitor what is the current level of inventory. And so because the inventory is continuously monitored, that means at any time there is an opportunity for you to place orders. All right, so for under continuous review, you may have different structures of optimal policy. And a common one that's used is the reorder point policy. Okay, so the reorder point policy basically says there is a certain level of inventory which we call the reorder point, or ROP, that as soon as the inventory drops to the reorder point or below the reorder point, we're going to place an order of size Q. And then, aside from continuous review, we may sometimes review inventory periodically. So, which means this would apply to more of inventory with manual accounting or periodic accounting. So you don't know the inventory levels at all times. You would only count it, once a day or once a week. So then only at these inventory accounting points would you make inventory replenishment decisions. Okay, so we're going to focus our discussion on the first type of replenishment policy, assuming that we always know inventory level, and we're going to apply the reorder point policy. Okay, so now it's important for us to determine the relationship between the reorder point and the safety inventory level. So I want to introduce a terminology here called lead time demand. Or demand during lead time. So since our lead time length is L and demand rate is on average D, so expected demand during lead time is just D times L. And of course, lead time demand is also a random variable since demand is random. And so based on our inventory dynamic, say my safety stock level is here, and each time I order Q units of products. So this level would be Q plus SS. Okay, and then let's also simplify the figures so that demand, we're treating it as the average demand. Okay, so then the safety inventory level is such that on average, I expect that the lowest point of my inventory is at least the safety inventory level, right? So at all times, if demand happens to be at my forecast level, I expect to have at least safety inventory amount in my warehouse. Okay, so now we know these are our lowest points. And each time I reach reorder point, I place an order of size Q. So let's say this is our reorder point. Then the relationship between reorder point and safety inventory level is determined by our lead time, or lead time demand. Because if I place an order here, then the order is going to be received after L units of time, right? And then, so the demand during this portion is going to be on average D times L. Therefore, you can now see the relationship between safety stock and reorder point. So safety stock is equal to reorder point minus D times L. Okay, so let's look at an example. Let's look at the example of B&M office supplies. So looking at the weekly demand for B&M, the demand is normally distributed. The average is 2,500. So which means our D is 2,500. And standard deviation is 500. So sigma D is 500. The manufacturer takes 2 weeks to fill an order placed by the B&M manager. Therefore, this is our lead time. And so 2 weeks. And the store manager currently orders 10,000 phones when the inventory on hand drops to 6,000. So what does that tell us? Q. And ROP is 6,000. So then we're asked to evaluate the safety inventory and the average inventory, as well as the average time a phone spends at B&M. So average time a phone spends at B&M is called what? Flow time, or average flow time. Okay, Okay, so these are our input parameters. And our safety inventory as a result is RP minus D times L. So 6,000 minus 2,500 times 2 equals 1,000 units. And cycle inventory, the other part is the cycle inventory. Don't forget about this part. So cycle inventory is, so again, we have this graph. Cycle inventory is the average of the top portion. So Q divided by 2, so 5,000 cycle inventory. So the total average inventory is the sum of these two types of inventory and equals 6,000. And the average flow time then is equal to inventory divided by throughput or demand. Right, so it's throughput is equal to demand. And turns out, on average, inventory would spend 2.4 weeks in the warehouse. Okay. So now that we know what is the reorder point and the safety stock in this system, we want to know what is the resulting service level. And let's say we are interested in calculating the cycle service level. Now, so the cycle service level is equal to the probability of demand during lead time of weeks less than or equal to the reorder point. Alright, so this is, again, going back to this figure. Now, in reality, our demand occurs randomly. So inventory will also not follow a straight line. Now, say my inventory drops to the reorder point, and then so since it drops to reorder point, the inventory replenishment policy specifies that I place an order here. Right, so place order, and then also order size has been determined, so of size Q here. So then we need to know what is the cycle service level as a result of this policy. Now, cycle service level is basically during each cycle, what or throughout time, what is the probability that I'm out of inventory. Okay, so this, whether I'm out of inventory or not, is dependent on what happens during the next lead time. So I know that whatever I order, this Q units of inventory is going to be received at after L units of time. And so here, if our lead time demand is from here, this point to this point. Demand during lead time. If demand during lead time is less than the reorder point, then I don't run out of inventory. If, on the contrary, demand during lead time becomes larger than the reorder point, then I do run out of inventory. So the probability of stock out, or probability of no stock out, I should say, is the probability of demand during lead times being less than or equal to the reorder point. Okay, are we clear about this? Questions?
Can you repeat the same thing again?
Yes. So there are two scenarios, right? What happens during this replenishment lead time after the order is placed. So in one case, the number of orders received during this time is less than the reorder point. So which will bring my inventory level to some positive number. And I will receive my inventory order at this point, which will only bring it higher. So in this case, I don't run out of inventory. In the other case, the demand during lead time is so large that the reorder point, my existing inventory cannot cover it. So then I run out of inventory during this cycle. And the demand during lead time, this happens when demand during lead time is greater than the reorder point. Therefore, cycle service level is equivalent to the probability of demand during lead time being less than or equal to the reorder point. All right. So this is an important logic. Make sure you understand. And therefore, this can be, since, let's say, our demand during lead time follows a normal distribution with average DL and standard deviation sigma L. Okay, so we already calculated DL is equal to D times L. And we just need to figure out what is the sigma L. So, but as long as we find out what DL and sigma L is, we can write this probability as the CDF function for demand during lead time. Okay, so this function means the probability of demand during lead time being less than or equal to ROP. So since lead time demand is normally distributed, this F function follows a normal distribution. So it's a normal CDF function with mean DL and standard deviation sigma L. And you can calculate this value in any software or programming language. So in Excel, you can easily calculate this value using this norm dist function. So a norm dist function, let me write this. So norm dist, the first input is the CDF function input number, input value. And then you input the mean, and then the standard deviation, and then whether or not this is a cumulative distribution function or not. So if the fourth input is 1, it means it's CDF. If it's 0, it means it's PDF. Okay, so in this example, we can calculate, so the lead time demand average is D times L, and lead time demand standard deviation is equal to square root of L times the demand rate standard deviation. So very briefly, this is basically the variance of dl is equal to sum of td, variance of dt from t to L, and assuming that the demands are independent from time to time, this is going to be t from 1 to L. This is sigma d square. So L times sigma d square. Therefore, sigma L is the square root of this whole thing. So make sure that you don't miss the square root part. Now that we can input these mean and standard deviation values into our CDF function. So in this example, we have norm dist function with ROP equal to 6,000 and mean is 5,000, standard deviation 707, and it is a CDF function. And this turns out to be 0.92. So I have also uploaded this Excel example on Canvas. So you can see this has a more comprehensive calculation of this example. These are the input parameters, for the demand, lead time, and lot size. And then here we calculate the distribution for the lead time demand. Okay, so lead time demand mean is D times L, and the standard deviation is square root of L times sigma D. Okay, so then the reorder point, what we had looked at is this row. So if reorder point is 6,000, then we can calculate the safety inventory is the reorder point minus D times L equals 1,000. And then the other parts we have calculated before, average inventory is safety inventory plus cycle inventory. And you can also calculate the flow time accordingly. The CSL is what we just talked about. So this is equal to norm dist, and first input is our ROP value, and then we have the mean, which is here, standard deviation is this one, and then CDF cumulative to be true. So this will give us the cycle service level about 92%. So, and then you can do this for various different levels of reorder point. Right? So basically, reorder points in practice is also a decision that you can change as the operations manager. So you can see for different reorder points, the larger the reorder point, the higher the CSL. Right, so the more inventory I hold, the more available the product is. on average, I'll be able to satisfy customer demand more. But the drawback is I'm going to have higher inventory. Right, so the average inventory is also increasing in this direction. Then we need to find, the optimal trade-off between these two. So what we just did is, given that we had specified a safety inventory level, we evaluate what is the resulting service level for this safety inventory. We can also do the reverse, which is usually what happens in practice, right? We are given that I want to be able to satisfy customer demand, 95% on average. Then, in order to achieve that, what is this desired safety inventory? So we're going to reverse that process. Now, CSL is a given value. And we also have calculated DL and sigma L, which is the distribution for demand during lead time. So we continue using the formula of CSL, which is CSL equal to the probability of demand during lead time being less than or equal to the reorder point. Right, so this is basically demand during lead time less than or equal to ROP. And ROP is equal to SS plus DL. Therefore, we can specifically write out the relationship between SS and CSL. Okay, so now this is F is the CDF function for lead time demand again. To this point, we haven't assumed any specific distribution of the lead time demand. Now, if actually to this point we haven't assumed any specific distribution. What we did from this step to this step is we applied an inverse CDF function to both sides. So F, the inverse function of F on the left side, and then the inverse function of F on the right side as well. So on the left side, these two will cancel out. What we end up is just DL plus SS. And on the right-hand side, we have the inverse demand function with input of CSL. And in Excel, this is also easily realized through this norm in function, which you input your CSL as the first input, the mean second, and then standard deviation third. So here we assume normal distribution. Therefore, from here to here, we just move DL to the right-hand side. Okay. And then from this step to this step is we're using the relationship between normal distribution and standard normal distribution. So this is just so that it allows us to use less input. So in your homework, you can use either one to get the same result. So this relationship is basically our norm inverse function CSL dL sigma L is equal to this standard normal inverse function. So just adding this S, norm S inverse, and standard normal distribution is the normal distribution with 0 mean and 1 standard deviation. And so we only need to input CSL as our into the norms in function. And this has to multiply by sigma L and plus dl. So this is a given relationship between our regular normal distribution and standard normal distribution. So using this, we can further simplify this formula a little bit. So from this relationship, we can get this part is just equal to norms in CSL times sigma L, and we had shown that sigma L is equal to square root L times sigma D. Okay, so inputting this process to our example, this is our input, which is pretty much the same as what we had before, except that now we have a desired service level requirement. So we would like to guarantee service level to be 90%. And we want to find out what is the service safety stock level for ensuring that 90% service level. Okay, so then we just plug in the numbers into this norms in function. So the norms in input is 0.9. And don't forget it's multiplied by sigma L, which we had calculated to be 707. So the safety stock turns out to be 906. So again, in Canvas, you'll be able to find the Excel for this question. All we do here is change the desired cycle service level to be 0.9, and then you can use the formula. So norms in the CSL value times sigma L. Any questions so far? Okay, so um, looking at what we had seen so far, the using our simplified case where we don't consider supply uncertainty, if we want to keep the product availability unaffected and then reduce safety inventory, that means that from this formula, we can see that if we want to keep this term unaffected, right, and then we want to reduce safety inventory, then we basically need to reduce sigma L. So to reduce sigma L, we can reduce the lead time. So, and this can be done through various solutions, working with a supplier and use delay differentiation, so on and so forth. And then reducing the underlying uncertainty of demand. So since sigma L is equal to L times square root of L times sigma D, so the other part to reduce is sigma D itself. So we cannot actually reduce customer behavior uncertainty, but since sigma D to us is actually forecast error, right? So then what we need to do is to reduce forecast error. And there are various solutions to reduce forecast error, which we'll discuss later. So for now, I want to illustrate this important concept of the impact of aggregation. So to see why aggregation of inventory would be beneficial, let's imagine, we have a region, say this is Southeast Michigan, and we have, Detroit, Dearborn, Troy, Ann Arbor, and so on and so forth. Right, so each region, let's say we're a retailer. Each region we face a certain demand, right? So D1, 2, D3, so on and so forth. And these demands are random variables. We don't know them for sure. And so we know the mean demand for each region and the standard deviation of demand for each region. And there's a possibility that these demands are correlated. Right? So, demand increase in Detroit could imply also a demand increase in Dearborn. Then, as a retailer, let's say I'm considering two strategies. So, option one is decentralized strategy, which means I'm going to build a store in each of these regions. And the other option is the aggregated option, which means I'm going to just build a single big store in the total area, Southeast Michigan area. So then let's see what these two options, how does that impact the safety inventory level? So based on our previous calculation, this for this, if we did the option, decentralized option, option 1, then for each region, we can calculate the safety inventory level SSI to be following this formula that we just described. And assume that there are a total of K regions, then the total safety inventory for me to hold in this entire area is going to be the sum of these SSIs. Okay. The other option, so option 2, in option 2, we have a single retail store, and the demand faced by this store is the sum of all the demand in this area. So this D, let's call it DC, is equal to the sum of DIs. And the variance of this total demand is equal to the sum of their variance and their covariances. So this is just the formula for calculating the sum of variance of a sum of random variables. And therefore, the standard deviation of total demand is this term, which is the square root of its variance. And let's make a simplification. Assume that all the regions are identical, just for us to see the results easily. So each DI, let's say, is equal to D, and each sigma I is equal to sigma. Okay, so then DC is just equal to K times D. And then the sigma D is equal to K times sigma squared plus K times K minus 1 times rho, and let's assume that rho ij is equal to rho and sigma squared. And you can even further simplify, assume rho is equal to 0, then you'll get this further simplified notation. So basically here, by assuming rho is equal to 0, we're assuming that the demand between different regions are independent of one another. Okay, so now from these equations, if demand is independent, we have this formula. What if demand is perfectly correlated? So perfectly correlated demand means that rho is equal to 1. Right? If rho is equal to 1, what is our sigma DC?
Square root of K sigma square plus K plus K into K minus 1 sigma square.
And this is equal to K times sigma. Okay? So comparing these two, we can see that the higher the correlation, the higher the total demand variability. And so for the aggregate option, we can also use the safety inventory formula. There shouldn't be the summation. So in the aggregate solution, we're also facing one total demand, right, with sigma DC as the standard deviation. So this is our safety stock in the centralized or the aggregated solution. So then we can calculate it after aggregation, how much we would save on safety inventory holding. So this is equal to basically holding cost times the difference between inventory held in a decentralized case and the aggregated case. And this is this term is actually per unit sold, so we're going to divide it by DC as well. Okay, so our after assuming sigma I are the same, this term is K sigma, correct? So this is equal to K sigma minus sigma DC. Now, if rho is equal to 0, this is basically K sigma time minus square root K sigma. And this is obviously greater than 0. So we would achieve a positive saving by aggregating inventory. Now what happens when we have perfectly correlated demand? Then this term becomes K sigma, so the saving becomes 0. Then we don't benefit from aggregation. Okay, so can you explain intuitively why would aggregation reduce safety inventory in most cases?
For like one store, if there is more demand, and for the other store the demand is less, so it nullifies the effect. It cancels out the effect.
Right. So basically the uncertainties between different regions would cancel out. But this cancellation disappears if all the demand are perfectly correlated. So they would have no opportunity to cancel each other out. Okay. So then looking at this inventory saving, how does this saving change with service level? Increase or decrease? Service level increase means that this term, if this CSL is higher, then this cost saving would increase, right? So which means if we have a higher product availability level, then we would be inclined to do more aggregation. So the other thing is lead time. So if lead time increases, then we would also tend to benefit more from aggregation, right? And if there's more demand variability, then we also benefit more from aggregation. If we have higher holding costs, of course, we would benefit more. If we have more demand correlation, then we benefit less from aggregation. Okay, so, and the total safety inventory also increase with the number of locations we're aggregating. Right, the higher the number of locations that we aggregate, the more saving in inventory we achieve. And this saving also performs as a square root shape. So the increase in savings will reduce as the number of locations increase. Now, okay, so now question is, do we always want to increase, aggregate as many locations as possible?
No.
Why not?
Holding cost would decrease, but
We just showed holding costs would decrease.
The feasibility to like distribute becomes more difficult if we like if we want to send the material to a location which is far from the central location, it becomes difficult for transportation and other.
Yes. Very good. Exactly. So basically, if we aggregate more, imagine that I'm building one location in Detroit. Then everyone from Dearborn, from Troy, from Ann Arbor, all need to go to Detroit to shop. So the responsiveness of this network will significantly reduce, and which may also affect customer service level. Okay, if we consider the time customers spend as part of their service experience. So then we need to, even though aggregation benefits inventory, overall it may not actually be the right solution. So this is a simple example of aggregating over 4 locations, and you can see that with these 4 locations being aggregated, the safety inventory reduces basically by half, which is assuming that demand is independent between different regions. And this table tells you basically the impact of demand correlation on aggregate benefit. So as rho approaches 1, the aggregate benefit reduces to 0. So, and then we mentioned the disadvantage of aggregation. One is increase the response time to customer demand, and then also the transportation cost to customer. So it may not be the best solution. Okay, so let's take a break. Okay, so some final points about safety inventory. One is how we place the management of safety inventory in the context of multi-echelon supply chain. So in multi-echelon supply chain, it means we have more than one stages. So we may have a retailer, manufacturer, supplier, and so on and so forth. And one implication in the approach we just used is to bear in mind in multi-echelon supply chains, oftentimes we do not know exact demand and supply distributions. So there could be a lot of errors, and different parties may have different estimations of supply or demand distributions. And in managing multi-echelon supply chain safety stock, instead of looking at the inventory at a single stage, what is shown to be a better solution is to actually look at the so-called echelon inventory. So what is echelon inventory? Echelon inventory is the sum of all the inventory held between a particular stage to the end customers. So for the retailer, the echelon inventory is just its own inventory. For the manufacturer, the echelon inventory is the inventory of the manufacturer and the retailer. And for the supplier, is the inventory of all three parties. So the reason why we care about echelon inventory instead of just the inventory at single stages is because how much inventory, safety inventory is carried at a single stage, it is going to affect other stages, right? So say, the manufacturer carries more safety inventory. To the retailer, that means my supply uncertainty is reduced. And in determining the best safety stock, the retailer going to evaluate the demand and supply uncertainty. So when the manufacturer changes its safety inventory, it's going to affect what is the optimal inventory level at the retailer. And vice versa, if the retailer decides to hold very little inventory, that means the manufacturer has to be very responsive to the retailer's request. And therefore, the manufacturer would actually like to consider its own inventory at the retailer's inventory. So oftentimes, as long as we have the capability to share information, then we would see reorder points or order up to levels for echelon inventory instead of a single stage inventory. And decision should be made about the level of safety inventory carried at different stages. And finally, some managerial levers to reduce safety inventory. Basically, we would like to reduce the uncertainty for both the supply side and the demand side. In order to reduce supply side uncertainty, we would like to perhaps share more information. The supplier could, for example, let the buyer know ahead of time when it's going to deliver its order and how much is going to arrive. And then the buyer and supplier could coordinate to plan the demand and supply together instead of each stage individually do their own planning. And then reduction of lead time. So this is going to reduce the not only the lead time demand uncertainty, but also the forecast errors, right? So because lead time also determines how far ahead we need to make the forecast. So, and then one observation to note here is within all these processes, the delays actually make a much larger contribution to the lead time than the actual processing times and the transportation times themselves. So delays means that the times products spent waiting, either because there's congestion, there's mismatch of components, or machine idling, machine breakdown, so on and so forth. So in reducing lead time, the effort should be focused on reducing these delays rather than the production, the so-called raw production time and the raw transportation time. Finally, we would also like to reduce demand uncertainty. So one is have the supply chain parties work with one another to share information so that there is less information distortion, and so the upstream supply chain members would have less demand uncertainty. And then in forecasting, we talked about the loss of forecasting. We know that aggregated forecast is more accurate than disaggregated forecast. So by pulling demand forecasts together, we're able to reduce the total demand uncertainty involved. Questions? Okay, so the topic in chapter 13 is very, very similar to chapter 12. And what we're looking at in chapter 13 is how to determine the appropriate product availability or service level. So one, we're going to look at what is going to affect product availability, and then what service level is going to maximize supply chain profit. Looking at some managerial levers to improve supply chain profitability, and understand the issue of, or the benefit of, postponement. So, what are some factors affecting the desired level of product availability or desired product service level? So we mentioned that service level or product availability is measured by these metrics such as cycle service level or fill rate, either product fill rate or order fill rate. So, and we focus on cycle service level, and we're going to continue with that focus. And so why is product availability, desired level of product availability so important? It's because it's directly affecting our supply chain strategy, right? So we talked about supply chain strategy being on a spectrum of responsive versus efficient. So if the product is more available, that means that we're able to have a very responsive supply chain because we can immediately fulfill customer demand. And this could be directly associated with higher revenues, right? And if we have the on the downside of that, of course, we have costs associated with holding inventory, and that will increase the cost associated with operating the supply chain. So then, since customer service level is directly associated with profit and supply chain strategy, then we can design the appropriate level of product availability to achieve the maximum result. So take the example of LL Bean, who sells ski jackets, from which the selling season is from November to February, and the buyer currently purchased the entire season's supply from the manufacturer before the start of the selling season. And so based on past demand, they had estimated the demand distribution, which is given in this table. So you can see that this is a rough estimate. So the demand is actually discretized into several possible scenarios, right? Demand could be 400, 500 through 1700, and with corresponding probabilities. And these columns are the cumulative probabilities. So what is the probability of demand being less than a certain amount? And then this column is the opposite. So the probability of demand being greater than a certain amount. So each jacket or parka costs LL Bean $45, and the selling price is $100. If a parka is unsold at the end of the selling season, then they will be sold at the outlet store for $50. And holding in the parka in inventory and transportation will cost LL Bean $10 per parka per selling season. Okay, so from the given information, we can calculate what is the current performance. Right, so the demand expectation can be easily calculated by summing over all the demand possibilities and times their probability. So expected demand is around 1,026 units. So then if say the LL Bean is placing orders according to expected demand, right? So the buyer would have order around this expected demand value, and let's say they do a rounding and then just order 1,000 units. then we can calculate the resulting expected profit from this ordering policy. Now, the expected profit depends on what the demand ends up to be. Right, so there could be two scenarios. One scenario is when I have leftover inventory, and the other scenario is when I don't, or when I sell out. So in this first term is for the scenario with leftover and then the second term is when I have a stock out. Now, since my order quantity is 1,000, then the first scenario happens for these scenarios, right? So for these scenarios, I'm able to satisfy all the demand, and with possibly inventory left over. So then in this scenario, I'm going to make a profit on each unit of product I sell, but there is a penalty associated with selling a product after the season ends in the outlet. So this is our regular profit margin for each sale, and this is basically our penalty for not selling it during the selling season. Okay, so since our order is higher than demand, then I'm going to sell demand, and then the rest is going to be sold as a discount item. In a second scenario, I'm going to run stock out. Therefore, I'm going to sell out all the inventory. So all 1,000 units is sold at regular margin. So then if you plug in numbers, you can calculate this expected profit to be $49,900. Now, under this policy, looking at this demand distribution, then there is a 51% probability that the demand will be completely met, right? And then the 49% probability that I'm going to have a stock out. So this probability, of course, depends on how much we order. Now, say, what if I order 100 units more? Right, so for each unit I'm selling additionally, I'm going to profit P minus C. So P minus C is equal to $55. And for each unit that is not sold at the end of the season, I'm going to incur a loss of C minus S, which is minus $5. And if I'm going to sell, if I'm going to order one additional 100 Parkers, what is going to, how much change would I expect profit to happen to profit? So again, like this 100 parkas, since we use this discrete demand distribution, things are pretty easy in our demand realization. So if I order from 10,000 to 11,000, what's going to happen is either I'm going to have a demand that's going to be higher than what I order or lower than what I order. If it's higher than what I order, I'm going to sell everything, right? And so the additional revenue I'm going to accrue from this 100 units is 55 per unit times 100. So compared to my original profit, if demand turns out to be higher than 1,100, then I'm going to make this much more money. In the other case, if demand turns out to be less than what I order, then I'm going to incur a cost. Right, so $5 per unit times 100 units. And so this is going to be my loss if this happens. Okay, so the total of this profit change is going to be $2,440, which means the expected profit from ordering I should say expected profit increase is this much. So the expected profit from ordering 1,100 units is going to be 499 plus 2440 equals 340. So if I order 100 more, my expected profit increases. And you can continue this process to say, if I order another 100 units more, what is the marginal profit for that decision? And we can then conclude with this table. Right? This is comparing to the baseline, the expected marginal contribution from each 100 unit increment is going to be this much. Okay? So then based on this table, can you tell me how much should we order? 1,300. Why is that? So basically, if I order any more, the profit will reduce, right? And if I order any less, its profit also is not going to be as high. So 1,300 is the optimal order quantity for LL Bean. And the expected profit is going to be the original profit plus these increments of 300 units. And if you plot out the expected profit figure, it will look like something like this. And this highest points would correspond to 1,300 units. So, can you tell me what is the corresponding cycle service level? Looking at this table. 0.92. Yes. So this is our cycle service level, corresponding to 1,300 units. Okay, so now let's actually get to determining the most desirable level of product availability. Now let's think in the previous example, we incurred several factors that affected our decision. One is the costs associated with overstocking. Right, so if we order too much, it's going to cost us somewhat because we have to discount the product at the end of the selling season. If there's a understock occur, then we cannot capture the revenue we could have captured by ordering more. So there is also a cost associated with that, and we call it CU, the cost of understocking. And then what else affects the desirable level of product availability? It depends on the order scenario. So whether you're ordering for a single season, which is the case for our LL Bean example, or you're ordering for a single season, but also facing a price quantity discount. If you're ordering continuously based on continuous inventory review, and what is the treatment of leftover unsatisfied demand, whether it's back ordered or backlogged, or is it lost forever? So in all these possible scenarios, the desired level of product availability is going to change somewhat, but the main message will be consistent throughout these different scenarios. So we're going to focus on just the first scenario with a single order season. So again, we're given various inputs. So the cost of overstocking, which we calculated as the cost of acquiring an item minus the cost of salvaging an item or selling it after the season. And then the cost of understocking is basically the lost profit margin. And the optimal cycle service level is denoted by CSL star. Optimal order quantity is O star. So we have shown that CSL is the probability of demand being less than O star, right? So therefore, we can see that if we purchase one extra unit, the expected benefit is going to be the probability that demand is going to be higher than O star multiplied by the marginal profit level. Okay, so this is the probability of demand greater than O star. So that if I order one more unit, I would be able to sell it. Okay, that's that probability. The expected cost of purchasing, the cost of purchasing another unit is what if I can't sell it? What if demand turns out to be actually less than O star? Then I'm going to incur this cost of overstocking. So then the marginal contribution of increasing the order size by 1 is equal to the benefit minus the cost. So, and then we can see that if this marginal contribution, it changes, it changes in this, like this bell curve. So at some point, this marginal contribution is going to be 0. And that corresponds to our optimal order quantity. So in order to achieve the optimal solution, we are going to let this be 0 and solve for CSL star. Alright, so remember that in this solution we have already accounted for what is the optimal order quantity under this service level. Okay. So now CSL should be equal to this value. So if you're you have taken 580, you should be familiar with this formula, CU divided by CU plus CO. So basically the desired service level is dependent on the ratio between the cost of over-ordering and the cost of under-ordering. And the higher the cost of over-ordering, that means our desired service level should be higher or lower.
Lower.
Should be, if the over-ordering cost is higher, then CSL star should be
Yes.
lower. Yep. And if the under-ordering cost is higher, then that means our service level should be high. Okay. And this is just what we have shown in chapter 12. So according to, based on this optimal service level, we can always calculate the optimal order quantity. And here is the resulting expected profit. So you don't need to understand the derivation of this expected profit. So you can simply put in the formula into Excel and have it calculate the expected profit for you. And so the derivation of these formulas, if you're interested, is in the appendix of the textbook, appendix 13A through D. So our CSL is, if you see the book or some questions describing critical fractile, this is what it refers to. So it's equal to this thing. Now, if demand follows normal distribution, then we can calculate the optimal order quantity using this formula. And we can also calculate expected profits using these norm dist functions or norm norm dist functions. So this small f is the PDF function, and big F is the
CD.
CDF function. And so you can see here is 1 and here is 0. And so if you can see this desirable level of service level is going to decrease with this ratio of CO and CU. And the rate of decrease is also decreasing. Applying this to our example, so assuming that we have the demand distribution of the season is on average demand is 350, demand standard deviation is 100, and cost is 100, selling price is 250, salvage value or disposal value is $85, and then inventory holding cost is $5. So then the salvage value is equal to $85 minus the holding cost, so equal to $80. And then we can calculate the understocking and overstocking costs. So cost of understocking is P minus C, so $150. Cost of overstocking is 100 minus 80 equals 20. The rest is plugging in the formula. So we can calculate this critical fractile being equal to 0.88. Then you can compute the optimal order quantity corresponding to this optimal fractile equal to 468. Then expected profit formula can also follow. So there's also an Excel sheet for chapter 13. So in the first example, we are calculating the optimal service level, so which is just the critical fractile, right? And then the optimal order size is using our normal inverse function with given demand distribution, and at the optimal service level. So expected profit follows this long formula. You can check that it matches with the formula provided in the lecture note. Additionally, you can also, these are some formulas for calculating expected overstock, and under stock. So again, it's going to depend on the order quantity, O. And the demand distribution, which is defined by mu and sigma. And then the Fs is the CDF function of a standard normal distribution. And then this is the PDF of standard normal distribution. So then we can compute the expected over and under stock in this example. So 108 units of expected overstock, and on average we also expect to lose 8 units of customer demand. So you can also see that in this example, in this sheet. Okay, so now that we know that there is a optimal service level that we can determine in order to maximize the total profit for the selling season, what are some managerial decisions that we can make to further improve supply chain profitability? So there are 3 basic levers based on how we determine the optimal profit and optimal service level. So we've seen that in the optimal profit function, what determines expected optimal profit is, 1, the cost of overstocking and understocking, and then the other one is the demand uncertainty, so the demand distribution sigma. Now, in order to further improve profitability, we can try to improve on these measures. So 1 is increasing the salvage value so that we can reduce the overage cost. So there are various ways to reduce salvage value. So for example, instead of completely throwing leftover inventory away, we can sell it to outlet stores, and there are also examples of sellers with highly seasonal demand, right? So for example, if we're selling winter wear, when our winter is over here, there is winter in the southern hemisphere, right? So then selling the leftover inventory from our winter to South America or Australia is also a strategy to reduce the overage cost. And then decreasing the margin loss from a stock out, so basically reducing the understock cost. One way to do that is to use backup sourcing. So backup sourcing is basically when you don't have inventory for a retailer, for example, when you don't have inventory to satisfy customer demand, you may even purchase inventory from alternative sources or even sometimes your competitors to satisfy customer demand. So that these customer demand are not lost forever. Of course, that's going to be more costly to you than using your own inventory, but it's better than completely losing the demand. Another alternative is to use substitutable products, which may not be exactly what the customers are looking for, so there is a penalty in the revenue. But again, it's better than losing the sale completely. Then we have the third level of decreasing the uncertainty of demand, so which is equivalent to improving forecast. So then what is the benefit of improving forecast? So improving forecasts directly for our profitability model, our demand uncertainty is directly reduced. So safety inventory is expected to also decrease, and for either we can achieve safety as same amount of product availability with less safety inventory, or keeping the same amount of inventory but have higher service level. Or sometimes we can do both. So reduce safety inventory while still achieving a higher service level than before. So if you plot out the impact of forecast improvements, on the x-axis is if we reduce the standard deviation of demand, then we expect that we increase the standard deviation of demand, then we expect the total profit to decrease, while the overstocking and understocking costs both increase. So this is illustrated so for example here, the difference between these two are we reduce the standard deviation of demand. Right, so this is our original solution. And you can see that if demand uncertainty is decreased, then we can afford to have a much lower optimal order quantity, therefore a much lower safety inventory, and the total profit is also increased because one, we have better ability to match supply with demand, and two, the cost is also reduced. Then to decrease demand uncertainty or improve forecast, an important lever to use is to decrease lead time. So decreasing lead time is equivalent to increasing responsiveness of the supply chain. So lead time as is defined as the time between placing and receiving an order. So if the lead time is very long, that means I have to place an order and make the demand forecast very long before I actually need to make the sale. And since lead time demand is equal to, square root, lead time demand uncertainty is square root of lead time times demand uncertainty. So if we reduce the lead time, that means we reduce the lead time demand uncertainty. So the benefits include reduced inventory while achieving the same level of product availability, and we're better matching supply with demand, so less of overstock and less of understock, and higher profit. So by the way, this is the strategy applied by Zara with the famous rapid fire fulfillment, when they, instead of the majority of the market's strategy, which is to find low-cost supplier located in Asia, they decide to locate some of their production facility in Spain, which significantly reduced their lead time from several months to just a few weeks, and that allowed them to very fastly respond to market trends and also the actual demand realization. So one way of measuring or implementing quick response or short lead time is by ordering more frequently. Okay, so if again we're looking at our inventory dynamic, this is to say, instead of ordering like this, we're ordering like this. Okay, so smaller batch sizes and more frequent orders. So as a result, each time we only need to place a smaller order. So usually this not only serves to reduce cycle inventory, but also serve to reduce safety inventory, because the demand uncertainty during a shorter period of time is smaller, right, than a longer period of time. So you can see that as we increase the number of orders, the unsold inventory will decrease, whereas the expected profit will increase. Okay, so then should we order as frequently as possible?
No,
No,
because there is a cost involved in ordering. Every time you order, you incur a order cost.
Yeah, so that is the trade-off between efficiency and responsiveness, right? So there is no simple answer. It has to be case by case. And so the last point I want to mention is this phenomenon of order postponement. So order postponement is also called late differentiation. So basically, we don't differentiate the product until close to the end of the sale of the product. So that, you can imagine that the product goes through a whole process of production. And here is when we sell to the actual customer demand. And, as a retailer or as a, say, manufacturer, I may produce, a variety of different kinds of products, but I may not differentiate between different kinds of product until a certain point. So this is the point of differentiation. Before this point, what I produce are common components. And then after this point is differentiated products. Differentiated components or product. So the activities before before the differentiation are activities associated with these common components. So when we make demand forecast, we're forecasting for the demand of these common components. So one rule we talked about in demand forecasting is aggregated forecast is more accurate than disaggregated forecast. So in this region, we're reducing demand uncertainty by aggregating forecast. And in the second part is differentiated component or differentiated product. So here, because of the late differentiation, this part is supposedly very short. So time-wise, it's very short. It's close to when the demand actually realizes. So here in this portion, we're reducing the demand uncertainty by reducing lead time. And as a result of this practice, since we're reducing demand uncertainty, we would be able to better match supply with demand. And the implication on today's commerce environment is that this is particularly valuable for online sales, where we have a large variety of different products and potentially many common components. So let's look at one simple example of Benetton, who, let's say, sells t-shirts with 4 different colors. And so in order to produce different colors of t-shirts, they need to, one, complete the garment and then dye them into different colors. So traditionally, they use the sequence of process where first they dye the thread, and then the garments are knitted. And now they want to explore a different option where they first knit the t-shirt into basically the same white t-shirt and then dye them into different colors. So option 2 would be the late differentiation option, right? Because option 1, the differentiation happens at the beginning of the production. Okay, so the demand and selling price, salvage value are given the same are the same for the both options. The production cost for option 1 is $20 per unit, and for option 2 is $22 per unit. So this is also a key feature of late postponement, is that usually late differentiation or postponement is slightly more costly than early differentiation. So then we can see that basically the optimal CSL levels for these two options would differ slightly because of the production cost difference. And the optimal order quantity for option 1 is 1337, and the expected profit for each color of t-shirts is 23,664 and corresponding overstock. So you can calculate the total production by multiplying each production by 4, and the total profit is also each profit multiplied by 4, so $94,576. For option 2, the CSL is slightly lower because the cost of production is higher. Right, so we can't afford to overproduce as much as we did before. But now, in the late postponement, in the beginning part of the production, the demand is not differentiated, so we are able to aggregate all the demand. Right, so this is the same as what we saw before in the aggregation discussion, where we're aggregating 4 independent demand. So the mu is 4 times each demand, and a sigma is square root of 4 times each standard deviation. So you can see that the optimal order quantity is 4524, which is less than the total production from before. And expected profit is higher than the total expected profit from early differentiation. And you would also see less expected over and under stock. Okay, so basically the value of postponement comes from aggregation. The only difference is now we're aggregating over time versus location. Now, if demand across different colors are positively correlated, how would that affect the benefit of postponement?
The profits.
They will,
Increase the profits because
if demands are positively correlated,
To decrease, I guess.
would decrease the benefit because the
Less.
cancellation
Okay,
effect
yeah.
is less, right? Now, if demand is more predictable, how would the benefit change.
Option one would be feasible. Option one would be feasible, like it would be more for, profits would be more for option one.
Right, so the benefits of late postponement will also decrease. Yes. So when demand uncertainty is lower, then there's less of a need to aggregate demand uncertainty, right? And we need to also trade off the higher production cost versus this benefit. So we can actually calculate the thresholds for these benefits to disappear for demand correlation. If there's a correlation of 0.2 or higher, then actually late differentiation becomes not beneficial in this case. And if the standard deviation becomes less than 300, it also becomes not beneficial. All right, any other questions? That's it for today.